I've just been checking our fall planted burgundy bush beans. Now we planted these about 4 weeks ago and they're coming along very nicely. They have some blooms that are just about to open and we sure want to protect them from frost. And up here in our raised bed garden we have a nifty little arrangement that Brenda put together for us when we had some cold weather a few nights ago. And this is Remay, like we've been using out in the cold crops to screen out insects, and she's made what we call just little fitted sheets for the garden that will just fit over the corners, and then we can stretch the entire length of the row whenever frost threatens. Now we haven't had any hard freezes yet in most of Oklahoma, fortunately. It got down to I think about 33 here, and that wasn't cold enough to damage these, but the Remay was put on just in case to keep any frost off the surface of the foliage. Like I said, we have about 2 weeks before we can harvest some beans. The ones I have here from some pole beans out in our formal gardens, in the purple vegetable garden. And we want to make sure that we still get enough of a crop from these. Now some other fall vegetable chores that you want to be doing is checking your sweet potatoes. We mentioned that a couple of weeks ago, but let's see how they're progressing. We checked our sweet potatoes a few weeks ago to see how they're coming along, and I felt compelled to dig one now. And the reason for that is that we've had a couple of light frosts. I know that we're living on borrowed time with these, but you can't cover the whole garden up with Remay. And so we want to see how they're progressing, and that if they were ready to harvest, we'd go ahead and dig them today. Turns out they've got still a couple weeks to go. These were planted probably back in late May, and we had a lot of cool weather early in the summer, and it has slowed their progress. I haven't totally detached this sweet potato, so I'm going to try to tuck it back in the soil and let it continue growing and maturing. Now I have cut some of the vines away, but that's okay. There's plenty still attached, and I think it will go ahead and develop. But I do want to mention what you can do with these vines if you are going to just check your sweet potatoes but you're not ready to harvest them yet. These will make a great house plant for the winter. I remember my grandmother had a sweet potato vine in her kitchen, just in a water pitcher that was hung up near the ceiling. And they have a lot of axillary roots along them, as you can see right here. And although this leaf is considerably stretched out because this vine was way down in the garden, I think if you grow them indoors, you'll find that you'll have plenty of foliage coming out. And this variety is a purple form of sweet potato. Although the potatoes are white, the foliage is dark purple to black in appearance, and that'll make a very attractive houseplant. And come spring, you can take some slips from that and continue to propagate sweet potatoes and get them back into the garden. I've been going through our purple vegetable garden and looking at how beautiful the foliage is growing right now. The spider mites have done their damage and moved on. We're into some cooler, drier weather. And just take a look at these peppers. I've just cut these from some of the chili pepper varieties that we've been growing, and this is one easy way that you can harvest them now and store them for the winter if you want to use them as dried chilies. You can just cut the plants and then hang them upright. We have several varieties here, and you could just hang those indoors, let the foliage dry down, and then harvest them, or harvest them fresh. We're going to leave a few out there, just hedging our bets that the weather will hold off for at least a couple of more weeks, but we do want to get some in now as an added precaution. Now over with the tomatoes, there are several options you can go with tomatoes when fall is approaching. It still is really frustrating for me though, because look at that foliage. It's looking just perfect, not a spider mite in sight, and they're still setting tomatoes, but we know that we're living on borrowed time. Now you can go ahead and harvest the red tomatoes, and this variety that we have right here is Cherokee Purple. It's an heirloom tomato, and when it's ripe, it's a deep, deep kind of a blue-red, and just has delicious flavor. But when you're looking on the vine, you can go ahead and pick those ripe ones and eat them now. You could pick some hard green ones and make you some fried green tomatoes, but what do you do about the in-betweeners? At what point can you pick tomatoes and make sure that they'll ripen up? Well, in the tomato growing industry, there's a stage on the vine that they call the breaker stage. And at this point, we know that we can pick tomatoes and count on them to go ahead and turn ripe, and that's this point right here. It looks from the outside to be green, but there's a very slight tinge of pink on there. And if you see that, you know that you can go ahead and pick those, store them indoors, and they'll go ahead and turn a nice deep purple later on. In fact, they may even get darker red than this because they'll be indoors where it's even cooler. People who run tomato stands, roadside vegetable stands, this actually can qualify as a vine-ripened tomato because it has reached the breaker stage, and then they'll turn on and continue to turn red after picking. But we have a few other things here that we've picked from the purple vegetable garden. As I mentioned, the Cherokee purple tomato. We have some purple bell peppers, and they are kind of on the small side, and the reason for this is that when these were flowering a few weeks ago, before they went ahead and made their pepper pod, they were flowering in very high temperatures, and so the fruit is not very large on these. If we would just have about another month of warm weather, the peppers that are forming now would have a little larger size like this one right here. Now we also harvested some of our purple okra, and keep in mind that you want to pick it at a small stage like this. There's still plenty of that coming on so long as we have some nice warm sunny days. Right here are some black tepary beans, and this is from our Native American garden, and this apparently is a very long season pole bean, and tepary beans are grown by southwestern Indian tribes for drying. These could be eaten as green beans, but they really need a few more weeks to mature, but we went ahead and picked those because again we know that the cooler weather is coming on. Now I want to show you a bean that's just one of my favorites, and it's also Brenda's favorite for eating, and that's the black turtle bean. And after all, that is the reason we garden, is to have good tasting fresh food. This is a bean for drying. Some people call them just black beans or black turtle beans, and these have just been harvested. We do have some mold on the surface of them, but if you break them open, that one's moldy there, but there are some that do look okay. Let's take a look at this one. You don't want to store moldy beans. You want to make sure that they look nice and healthy. Here's one that's in pretty good shape right here. And Brenda harvested some a few weeks ago, and just take a look at those. And our favorite way to eat them is to cook those down and eat them with rice, or put them in a pressure cooker and make them really soft and blend those with some picante sauce. That'll make one of the best bean dips you've ever eaten. It's really tasty. Well, I hope you're enjoying your fall garden. Keep in mind that you do need to stay ahead of things, and you certainly want to pick some of your produce at the right stage so it will go ahead and ripen up indoors.